Hey, Juventini, welcome back to the All Juve cast. Now, we've been asked by one of our viewers to touch on bad sport and give our reaction on the episode on Netflix there involving Juventus and Calciopoli, which I should call Farsapoli, and Luciano Moggi. So, joining me on this one is Anthony, and we chose to do this one and thought it was a great idea by our viewer because we're both very, very well versed in what went down, and thought it'd be good for a lot of the younger Juventini out there to kind of get all the information because the first thing that came to our minds when we watched it was how one-sided it truly was. So, Anthony, thank you for joining me on this.
It's
We're
my pleasure. My
yeah,
pleasure.
we're gonna break this thing down. We're gonna give you all the information that was basically on the episode. We'll touch on our reactions on key points, and then we're gonna give you everything that they missed. And at the end of it, you're left with your opinion, but get all the information. All right. So, without further ado, we're going to kick it off with one of the first points that comes into the video, which is the investigation started in 2004 from a Camorra informant tip on referees. Anthony?
Well, it did not actually. It started as the investigation into Moggi actually started in the '90s into doping allegations. So that he was found. There was no case brought about in the '90s, and then in 2004, there was already a case in investigating the what's called GEA World, which was a talent agency which had a lot of famous people's children working there. And phone tapping that company, the phone taps from that revealed some sort of potential collusion or match fixing, as was brought up in the special, with referees and sporting directors from various teams.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely right. That is the true origin of what went down. They really, really press hard on Luciano Moggi. Obviously, he was the one punished the most, and Juventus as a club the most. And some of the points about just he's the one they heard talking the most. Absolutely, he was targeted, simply targeted. Anthony.
It's true, and they bring it up that he was the main. He had the most amount of phone calls. Well, over 171,000 calls. Is that 90% or is that 51%?
Yeah.
That wasn't quite revealed. Now we'll get into obviously a lot more of Moji and his phone calls as we go, but just based on that point, it's well, what percentage of the phone calls did Moji constitute in the investigation? Unknown.
Yeah, absolutely. This part I had to laugh because it kicks off right up the bat, and it's cherry picking some matches and some non-calls, some
Mhm.
calls, but they choose Sampdoria, the 3-0 victory, and a PK that Juventus gained in a 3-0 victory against Sampdoria.
Odd one. Like that's just a. I agree that that's a bad PK call, but that happens. That happens every week in every country in every match. There's a bad call to for or against the favorite teams.
That
That was weird, and the scoreline ended 3-0. So, and that was an
exactly,
amazing Juventus team. Let's not kid ourselves.
exactly.
That team was loaded.
So Juventus 04 to 06 was absolutely stacked, and I just laugh because this is a pre VAR era, and to see things like that get called or not get called all the time back then. Even
Mhm.
now with VAR, we see some shockers. So what are you gonna do? Start to put everything within the sport into question?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. The next one was Reggina in the 2-1 loss. Two goals were called back. Moggi apparently locks the referee in the locker room after this was one they really pushed a lot through this video, only to get basically laughed at in court when the referee said that never happened. But
That
Anthony, your thoughts on the Reggina video there, the
well,
section?
that's an odd one because one that goal on Zlatan should have been called back. He clearly fouled the defender. That's a good call by the referee. You have to refresh me on who scored the second one that was called back.
I
Was
can't
that
remember the goal scorer, but they called it offside.
that wasn't Turam, was it? But regardless, he was offside, and they called it. And so another weird one where the calls actually went against Juventus, and I understand that Moggi had calls afterwards where he was joking with a woman on the phone. That he now is this woman Bergamo's the head of the referee association? Is that his secretary? Is that Moggi's wife? Like he just seems to be having some sort of random conversation that any one of us would joke around. Hey, I did this to a referee, or so that again turns out to be false, but I guess it sets the narrative early on in the episode for what they're trying to prove as they move forward.
Yeah, and it seems funny to me because to put so much weight on a conversation he's having again with who knows who this lady is. That's like me calling you and all of a sudden like we're just shooting back and forth about a match and about a referee's performance, and all of a sudden it's like just weighted down on you. It just seemed very, very odd. They continue on after that one with Aldo Biscardi and his TV show, and how they were talking about it the next day. And Aldo went off about the referee needing to be punished on these calls and whatnot. Now, again, when we talk about the decisions in that game, I didn't have a problem with them watching them over and whatnot. So maybe it was very, very harsh as far as that. And you can maybe put a little bit of weight on that and some influence from Moggi. Your thoughts on that part of it?
Well, we're looking at a different era of the world. Like this is a time when sporting directors have much more power. They had much more influence. They had friends in all sorts of industries. Now let's remember the prime minister of the country, Silvio Berlusconi, owned Mediaset, which had TV stations, and you can't tell me that he wasn't having influence, or his sporting director wasn't having influence through the media. So, and he was the prime minister, and Rai being the state-owned broadcaster. So, again, the focus here was Juventus. I get it, but there's a lot more that could have went on. And okay, was Moggi influencing Biscardi? Possibly, but that's also the number one team in the country losing to a small team from Calabria, which normally shouldn't have happened. And you have there's going to be a lot of talking points about it, and then you have the head of the referee association berating the referees after the game. Now, was that because Moggi called them and complained, or was that because they brought unwarranted attention to the refereeing profession in Italy?
Yeah,
Unknown.
exactly right. And again, we're going to get to it, but they use the calls between Moggi and Bergamo a lot. Bergamo was on the phone a lot with a lot of directors. Okay, and we're going to get to that for
Yeah.
sure. But again, it wouldn't suit the narrative if they didn't press on the Juve and Moggi involvement. One of the best things early on in this video that Moggi says, this quote, and it's everyone hates winners, especially in Italy. And you can put that across almost every professional sport. And you think of like those winners, those dynasties, those teams that continue, they're hated. One of their things is outside of their fan base, they are hated.
Mm-hmm.
Juve is one of them. Now, you get to the alternate SIM cards, okay, burner phones. 18th of December 2004. Next game was against Milan. No phone calls about it.
Yeah, it was a weird juxtaposition where they talk about all the burner phones which you had, which we're gonna get to Moggi.
Yeah,
What was he doing with all the burner phones?
I know.
That's not a good look for my guy. All right,
That was
not
the
a
one
good look.
thing is like my dude. Why so many phones? Come on.
What you and I, we're not going to be able to talk that one off. All right, what
No.
are you doing with so many phones? All
Yeah.
right, so we're not going to look like too much like homers here. What are you doing with all the phones?
Yeah.
But the Milan game, they didn't bring up any phone calls about that game. There was no calls. There was no reference to that game. But they do bring up two bad calls. Again, the first one was the non-penalty call on Zabina, who normally as Juventus fans, we don't like to mention the name Zabina, but
Brings pain, a lot of pain.
A lot of pain. Okay, bad call, missed call. Again, no VAR in this situation. The second one was a non-advantage given to Kaká when there was two defenders back, and it would have been a 3-on-2.
Yeah.
And the game, even the commentator, even the journalists in the piece said the game wasn't that interesting anyways. There was no real moments of brilliance other than the non-penalty call and the non-advantage played. Weird.
Yeah. It was the two teams actually leveled themselves off quite well. That Milan side was extremely strong. And again, you're just picking a play where they didn't gain advantage on an attacking scenario because he called it down because it was a very dangerous tackle from Thuram. That's kind of tough. Let's pump the brakes here. Again, I had to laugh at some of the moments that they decided they were going to choose for this thing. So whatever, we'll give them that. We'll continue on.
On we go.
So Moggi meeting with FIGC members, journalists, and financiers and whatnot. So, okay. And driven around by police officers?
That's what sporting directors do. They meet with FIGC members, they meet with journalists, and they meet with financiers. That's their job. And, getting rides around by police officers, while it looks odd, did other sporting directors do it at the time? Possibly with a police escort. I don't know. Maybe they didn't have the availability of, private, one of those like black water firms for private security. Just use police officers. Maybe it was a service that the Carabinieri provided. Again, kind of a weird thing to bring up, but it's in line with the show, with what they're trying to, with the narrative they're trying to push.
Exactly. The discussion when Bergamo puts certain referees into a grid and him telling Moggi, this is what I thought was funny too, because it's not Moggi asking for a group. It's Bergamo actually stating what refs are in which grid.
Correct. They're in grids.
Yeah. It still had to be drawn, and it was drawn, and the names matched the grid that he set up. Like he just said, this is where these guys are in the grid and whatnot. This could be a team. It ended up being that team. And Moggi didn't even really he just said, okay, in the phone call. So it was a bit of an odd one there, and they showed the draw.
That was the big thing. They showed the room, and there's a photographer taking pictures of each thing that comes out. So again, and then they didn't really mention what happened in those. What were the results of those games? Were they in Juventus's favor? Were they in Milan's favor? Were they again? It's again kind of weird. They don't really dive into what those results were. That's a big point.
And this is one of the big things with this bad sport episode is that they don't touch on all these. You got 171,000 phone calls. We didn't win every game that season. Okay. So
surprisingly,
we didn't win every single game that season.
No.
And our team from 04 to 06 was absolutely stacked. But they don't touch on all the results, those moments. They cherry pick to create this narrative. So again, we'll continue on.
On we go.
They said that it was predetermined refs that got those games, but again, it was draw. There were people there. There were cameras. It was pulled. Okay, you got to go a little bit further to make that strong of a claim. You would have had to be there and jump in there at the moment and say, "Show me the other names in those pots." Nobody did that. That draw was run the same as it always has, and probably still is to this day. But again, we'll continue on. February 2005, Juve lost the top spot.
This one is really weird. This was a really weird one.
Yeah. Yellow card accumulations against Bologna versus Fiorentina. So that these players couldn't play against Juve the next week.
Right. So,
So
first of all, that game did not happen in February 2005. That game happened in December 2004. So that's first.
yeah,
Second of all, 4 Bologna players were given yellow cards that game, 2 of which didn't play against Juventus the next week. And of which 0 are the players that journalist named in the video. So
yeah,
he must have his recollection off of who was actually suspended for that game. And the Juventus game was the next week with Bologna, but that game happened. The Bologna Fiorentina game was actually December 5th, 2004. So December 12th would have been the Juventus Bologna game.
yeah,
And then again, players accumulate, and then the phone call that they aired was February 2005.
yeah,
So was that conversation Moggi talking to Bergamo and say, hey, remember that game? Those yellow cards actually helped us out.
yeah. It's the
So
whole
it's kind of
thing, the
weird
way
how
to
those,
piece
those
this thing
timelines don't
together.
really match up.
Strange. Yeah, there's a lot of things that don't match up. And then again, we get to another Milan Juve matchup. This I found hilarious because, again, another conversation with Bergamo that takes place with a lot of directors during
Mhm.
that time. This is what happened. And he states Colina's going to be the ref. Okay. Did Moggi blow a gasket? Did Moggi try to sway him in any way? Did he say anything other than, okay,
Okay.
it is what it is? And Juve goes on and wins. They
With one of the
win.
best goals I've ever seen between
Sick goal.
Delpiero and Trezeguet.
I love that goal. Delpiero on a block shot pops up. He bikes it over and Trezeguet heads it in. 1-0. So Juve
Yeah.
wins the match where they're simply stated Colina's are okay, great. They also didn't show how many matches throughout the season that Moggi probably didn't get refs that he would have liked or whatnot that we still got results in. So, like the whole thing, it's pretty funny. It's pretty funny. Anyways, we'll continue on. So again, 171,000 phone calls by summer 2005, but waited until May 2006.
So that's a big thing that I noticed. It just went from 2005 to 2006. So I'm not going to get into too much of what they missed now, but one piece they missed was that magistrates in Torino, Rome, and Naples chose not to charge anyone
Yes.
because there wasn't evidence. So we fast forward to May 2006,
Yeah.
where documents were submitted to the Gazzetta dello Sport by unknown. And you can see the 2 police officers in the investigators in the series where they were upset. Oh, they're going to ruin the investigation. Well, it doesn't. Were they the ones who leaked it? Now, what should be known here is that at the time, the owner of the Gazzetta del Sport was a man by the name of Guido Rossi. Now, Guido Rossi was a known Interista, and he was at one time he was the vice president of Inter.
Mhm.
So,
Was that Rossi or Carlo
oh,
Buono?
Carlo Buada. That's right.
Carlo Buono was
Right.
of the paper.
So at the
Yeah,
time, he
Guido
was the
Rossi will
one.
come into play for sure.
Oh, yeah, he's the one. We'll get to him.
Oh yeah,
So,
we'll
so,
get to
so
Guido
Carlo
Rossi.
was the owner of the Gazzetta dello Sport, and he was a former vice president of Inter. And they're the
Exactly.
newspaper that got not all the phone calls. They got a portion of it
Yeah.
by an unknown source.
And then the whole
Weird.
thing became wild from that point because
Yeah,
police had to
crazy.
rush with the subpoenas.
Yep.
What was he charged with? Like the whole thing seems so odd. You have other clubs being charged and deducted points as well. Okay. Having relationships with referee designator Pereto with Milan and everything. Moggi brought up the point that all the sporting directors talked to referee association. We talked a lot about that, and that even in England that was happening. Okay.
Mhm.
This was nothing new. Now you get to a verdict found in November of 2011 on Moggi. Okay. He basically was found guilty. He got 5 years and 4 months 5 counts. He was acquitted on another 8. On appeal, acquitted of the 2 counts of sports fraud. All other crimes were annulled due to the statute of limitations. Okay. Juventus, in the aftermath, were found innocent in a civil court. Okay. One referee, Massimo De Santis, served a 1-year suspension. No other referee was charged. Okay. That's the aftermath. There is a whole lot missing out of this show. And now we're going to feed you all the information you should have gotten to paint the full picture.
Right.
Let's kick it off with the president of the FIGC, Adriano Galliani, stepped down, and Guido Rossi,
There's the name.
he took over as the FIGC president. And after Franco Carraro resigned, after these phone calls came to light, Guido Rossi, who was director of Inter Milan from 1995 to 1999, is again, he was also an Inter fan. He was a shareholder in the club and a friend, close personal friend of Massimo Moratti.
So his first job was to oversee the Calcio, and there was a lot of pressure. There was a lot of pressure because everyone remembers that the World Cup was starting in less than 2 months. So all this came out in May, and they essentially had a month to get through this and try and figure out what they were going to do. And then the verdicts were passed after the World Cup, but he had a couple months that on the job was to lay the hammer down on his biggest rivals. So there's AC, there was Fiorentina, there's Juventus, Lazio. And he did the job. He did his job.
So again, yeah, Rossi came in as commissioner. He was in charge of the actual jury running the Calcio trials.
He selected the jurors.
And yeah, basically we know what happened. Juventus were indicted on the scandal after their punishment, which saw them relegated to Serie B. Of course, Rossi resigns from his post.
Yep.
Okay, and became president of Telecom Italia, TIM, which just happened to be the company that recorded all those conversations involving Moggi and all the others in the first place. Also on the board was none other than the head of Gazzetta dello Sport, Carlo Borra.
There you go. Wow. That's where I was getting the confusion before. That's how those two are connected. They were both on the board.
FIGC realized only too late that Guido Rossi had a conflict of interest and asked him to step down as commissioner. The new delegates attempted further appeals in civil courts to return their verdicts, but were blackmailed into dropping it as FIFA announced that it had the option to suspend FIGC, which would freeze all Italian competition, even the Azzurri duty, okay, if the appeal took place. Juve basically left with 0 options but to drop it.
So that was a big one. That was just before the season was about to start, and Agnelli and team they were pushing for this appeal. And FIFA, I remember it clear as day, they stepped in and said, "Okay, you want to appeal? Serie A cannot start, and your Azzurri cannot play in any because then they would have been starting qualifying soon for the Euros." So essentially, blackmailed is a tough word, but essentially that's what it was. They were Juventus was backed into a corner to drop the appeals and accept the verdict that was handed down, which turned out to bite them in the butt years later when they appealed to CONI, which is a court of arbitration, another court of arbitration, and CONI said, well, since you already accepted an arbitration on this specific case and appeal, we will not hear this appeal. So it kind of
and the last bit I want to talk about, which was Massimo Moratti. Okay. So basically, Moratti, who was the head of Inter, okay, at that point, it was found that Moratti, okay, and the late former president Facchetti there also contacted Barreto and Bergamo, okay, many, many times, with the two parties having the same discussions as Luciano Moggi did about which officials would referee Inter's matches. The fact that none of these calls were leaked to the press makes that case about the whole conspiracy of Inter. And this is why. Because Telecom Italia, again, basically was the brand that they had all these communications, all these taps. They had those calls as well. Okay. And they were not released. These calls were brought to light because of Moggi's lawyers, not anybody else, not Telecom Italia, not the people that were going after Moggi. Nobody.
Right.
Moggi's lawyers got those calls. Okay. Otherwise, Telecom Italia, they kept everything under wraps.
It was crazy. And then what came of this in 2011 was that in 2011 the FIGC completed another investigation, and they found that one, uh, Moggi and Juventus did not break any Article 6, didn't have any Article 6 violations, which is match fixing or attempted match fixing. But they did find that it was Inter was one of the teams, Milan, and I believe Livorno was a third one that did have in the calls violations of Article 6. But again, in Italy, the court system works on a set time frame. So if the statute of limitation expires, which is in this case 5 years, those charges, those appeals will not be heard.
Yeah. And a last little juicy tidbit Alberto's got for all our viewers. Christian Vieri
Yeah.
made some allegations that were very, very strong involving this whole thing in 2010. He was a prolific striker for Inter, but as well as a player that played for Juventus and Milan. And Vieri claimed that Inter tapped his phone to spy on him, and that they made the squad sign a contract promising not to mention Inter's plans to bring down Juventus, Milan, and company. This was interesting. Um, yeah, and he said, I am ready to show everyone the document. Everyone knew what was happening. I was spied upon because I cannot keep these things locked up. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. 70% of the contract was to be paid by Inter and the other 30% by Telecom Italia.
It was a
In these
different time,
agreements.
Alberto. It was a different time back then, and there's been a lot of changes because of this in all of world football. Like it, this is what people did. This is how it was, and it wasn't clean. Like nobody was innocent. That's maybe the best summary that we can have on this, and this comes from our friend Joe Cappuccino on Twitter. He watched it yesterday, and he gave me the best 3-point summary. And I'm gonna take it, but I'm going to give him credit for it. But here it is. One, Moggi was not innocent, but he did use his powers to influence others. What the heck was he doing with all those burner phones?
Yeah.
You can't play that off.
And again, maybe it's something outside of football as well. The fact that he's got these burner, nobody knows. But again, he's not innocent, but you have to know without a shadow of a doubt if you're going to be accused of match fixing. And there
Yeah.
was nothing, absolutely nothing about match fixing.
Yeah. Yes. The other one was Moggi was always surrounded by scandal. So he's an easy kind of target, right? Okay. There was the dope scandal, which is, we could do a whole other pod on that if anyone
Yeah.
wants to hear that. Alberto, I can fix something up on that. Maybe Antonio, he would remember those days as well. But there was always scandal around him. So he's an easy person to sum up an investigation around, or to target if you hear some phone calls. So easy, makes for a great show. But
And the biggest thing is, though, it's the biggest club in Italy.
Yeah.
Juventus. Whether it was Moggi or someone else, we started to see things were in the works. There's too much outside information that they kept clear of this. And again, ultimately, the biggest thing, there is zero evidence of match fixing.
That's the main. That's
That
the
is
final dagger right there.
That is the one final thing that you can always fall back on. And again, they could have made the show absolutely epic, but they painted one picture only. They only gave you half of the picture. I hope you all enjoyed as we give you a full broad view of everything that took place and just how much that there could have been a lot more to it involving a major conflict of interest with a rival club that gained the most out of the proceedings, which I found funny that they kept that free and clear. But again, it wouldn't fit the narrative.
And
As
don't believe
always,
everything you see on the internet.
yeah, as always, Striped Hearts has the best new apparel that sums it up beautifully. Amici di nessuno. Okay? Juve versus the world.
That's right.
Always. Hope you guys enjoyed the breakdown, our reactions to Bad Sport. Can't wait to hear what you all think and your thoughts on what went down, how it was portrayed in this show, and we hope you enjoy this video. Again, don't be shy about asking for content that you are looking to see because we're always willing to do our best to bring it to you. Thank you again. Thank you, Anthony, as always. Hope you guys enjoyed. Till the next time. Forza Juve, fino alla fine.